Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Potential COVID-19 Products, Choosing the Right Path with FDA, presented by Roe. I'm Rebecca Williamson. I'm the publisher of Fierce Pharma, and I'll be moderating this session. Our speakers today are Kevin Barber, Vice President of Regulatory Strategy and Submissions at Roe, and Teresa Skoka, Research Scientist at Roe. You can read their full bios by selecting the Speakers tab on the left side of your window. I have just a few technical notes before we begin. The session is being streamed through your computer, so there's no dial-in number. For the best audio quality, please make sure that your volume is up. The session is being recorded and will be available on demand within 24 hours after the event. And time permitting, we'll follow the presentations with a Q&A session. So please submit your questions using the Q&A tab on the left side of your screen. All right, I think we're ready to begin. Kevin, please go ahead.
All right, great. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon for our presentation. Here's a quick outline of what we are going to cover this afternoon for reference when you download the slides. And I won't read through this, but just as a note, we will be providing some important links at the end as part of the downloadable presentation. So in our presentation today, we want to review the possible pathways based on the status, the development phase, and the overall goals for your product in the treatment of COVID-19 related indications. So with the goal of moving your product forward, it's very important to provide all the information that's needed to help FDA efficiently and expeditiously review your proposal. As noted here, our focus is on drugs and biologics regulated by FDA. We're not going to be talking about medical devices, but FDA Center for Devices is, of course, focusing on COVID-19, and you should refer to their website for more information. So before we jump into a discussion about the pathways, we do want to emphasize that products to treat COVID-19 patients are all investigational, and they require authorization from FDA based on a strong scientific rationale, as well as a clear understanding of the safety risks and the potential benefits in these patients. So before you submit a proposal to FDA for your product to treat COVID-19, you need to very carefully consider your scientific rationale and whether you have sufficient data based on the stage of development for your product to basically allow FDA to determine whether the risks and the potential benefits of your product are in fact appropriate for the target patient population in COVID-19. So you must keep in mind that there are very different benefit to risk considerations depending upon whether you're proposing to treat, for example, asymptomatic patients or patients exhibiting mild to moderate symptoms who are otherwise healthy or more severe hospitalized patients. So let's discuss the available pathways. Broadly speaking, there are three. There's the pre-IND, IND pathway, expanded access, and emergency use authorizations. The first of these listed here, the pre-IND and IND pathway, is of course the standard pathway to move an investigational product into the clinic. This requires submission of an investigational new drug application to the appropriate division at FDA, including all appropriate and necessary data across non-clinical, chemistry, manufacturing, and controls, and available clinical information to allow FDA to assess whether the known safety profile of your product, as well as the potential benefits of your product, are adequate to support conducting the clinical study that you propose to do in COVID-19 patients. We also want to emphasize that FDA, as well as we here at Roe, strongly recommend submitting a comprehensive pre-IND package to get FDA feedback before you submit your IND. This will ensure that you submit the right information in your IND, and it will assist FDA in prioritizing the review of your IND for your COVID-19 study. The second pathway to discuss is expanded access, which, as explained here, is the path that allows to allow patients with a serious or life-threatening disease to get access to an existing investigational product outside of clinical trials. Expanded access requests can cover everything from individual patient emergency use as well as use in intermediate or very large patient populations under expanded access treatment INDs or protocols. And the thing to note is that regardless of the scope or type of expanded access request, it still requires an IND with FDA, either an existing IND or a new expanded access IND. So for the third pathway, emergency use authorizations, FDA has the authority to allow use of an unapproved product in an emergency situation to treat serious diseases when there are no alternatives. To qualify, the product must be in an advanced phase of development or already approved for other indications to provide enough human safety information and enough evidence of the potential effectiveness to support such a request for emergency use. FDA's processes here, they do allow for a pre-EUA submission to get initial feedback from FDA, so we encourage that as well. Note that the emergency use authorization does not require an IND. The intent here is that the authorization provides sufficient information to healthcare providers on the appropriate emergency use of the product in the emergency use patient population. So again, keep in mind that other than potentially off-label use by a physician or an emergency use authorization, you do need to have an IND in place to treat COVID-19 patients with your product. Now, what's the appropriate path for your product? And this is going to depend upon the current stage of development for your product and whether you're ultimately trying to get approval from FDA to market the product to treat COVID-19 patients. So we wanted to run through a couple of examples quickly here. For the first, if you have a new investigational product or an approved product and you want to get approval from FDA to market that product in the U.S. to treat COVID-19 as a new indication, you'll need to follow the pre-IND and the IND path to conduct studies in the U.S. or global trials with U.S. sites to generate data to support a future marketing application for that indication. Now, for an investigational product that is currently in clinical development for other indications, if your goal is to gain emergency access for a single COVID-19 patient, then you'd follow the expanded access individual patient emergency use pathway. Somewhat similarly, for an investigational product that is currently in clinical development for other indications, if your goal is to provide access to that product for treatment of many COVID-19 patients rather than just a single patient, then you should consider following the expanded access pathway using a treatment protocol filed to an existing IND or open a new treatment IND as appropriate. And as a last example, if you have an approved product or a product that's in late stage development for other indications, if your goal is to gain widespread emergency use in COVID-19 patients, then you could consider submitting a request for emergency use authorization if you believe that you have enough safety and efficacy data to support such a request. It's important to point out that these programs and pathways can and should overlap as appropriate, and thus more than one pathway can apply. So for example, for an emergency use authorization, FDA also expects filing of an IND to move a product forward in development for that emergency use indication. Or you may need to do clinical studies under an IND in the U.S. or under CTAs, clinical trial authorizations in other countries first to generate clinical data to support an EUA request. And this was actually the case for Gilead's investigational antiviral product remdesivir, which was very recently granted emergency use in COVID-19 based on a couple of clinical studies conducted globally. And that product continues to undergo clinical investigation as an unapproved product. So now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Teresa to cover the remaining topics, starting with CTAP.
Thank you, Kevin. Now that we've discussed the potential goals and FDA pathways, I'm going to talk about the CTAP, or Coronavirus Treatment Acceleration Program, which is a special program put in place by FDA to support COVID-19 product development. The CTAP program is a a special emergency program. It's designed to use every available method to move new treatments for COVID-19 to patients as quickly as possible, but while also determining whether these products are helpful or harmful. This program puts in place a system for expedited review of development programs for possible therapies to treat COVID-19. This program operates in both CDER and CBER, and it applies to drug and biologic treatments. I will note that it does not apply to preventive vaccines. And as we mentioned, also this doesn't include medical devices. So CTAP has the goal to triage and expedite promising therapies for COVID-19. What this means is that upon receipt of a request, CTAP triages information on that new drug or biologic therapy, and if appropriate, CTAP connects those developers with FDA staff in the appropriate division. The current goal is to do this within a day. CTAP then provides a rapid interactive review of development plans, with priority being based upon a product's potential to treat COVID-19 and to move quickly in development. So being able to move quickly and have high potential is going to move a particular product to the top of the review pile. Requests submitted to CTAP can include a variety of different things. So one of those is a pre-IND package, including a proposed protocol design or a clinical study protocol when a therapy is ready for testing in the clinic. CTAP is expediting review of these protocols, and they're saying that some of these protocols are receiving review within 24 hours. Another type of request is a single patient emergency use protocol, or IND, and expanded access requests. These can currently be submitted around the clock. FDA is trying to have people available around the clock, and they're usually reviewed within 3 hours. You can also submit a request for an emergency use authorization. An additional priority of CTAP is to work to expedite quality assessments of these potential COVID-19 treatments, and if needed, to assist the developers in assuring appropriate supply. So if manufacturing needs to be transferred, or if there needs to be a new or alternative manufacturing site to avoid supply disruptions if a product is successful, CTAP is also designed to assist that work. To support the work of CTAP, FDA has streamlined processes and operations for receiving these requests. As you can tell, the timelines are very quick. They've redeployed staff, and they're directly involving senior management in the reviews. And they're also directly assisting providers in submitting, for example, emergency use requests for investigational products if they're not experienced at doing that. So now that you understand the purposes and functions of CTAP, the question is, how do you know if you should submit a proposal to CTAP for your potential COVID-19 therapeutic product? Because CTAP's goal is to expedite the development of safe and effective treatments for COVID-19 patients as soon as possible, you should thoughtfully consider whether your product truly has the potential for this expedited development pathway. Priority of review is going to be based on a product's scientific merits and readiness as a potential treatment. So you should only consider a submission to CTAP if your product has strong scientific merits directly as a treatment for COVID-19. As I said, those are the products that are going to be prioritized and expedited by FDA. CTAP is designed to expedite review so that potential therapies can move to patients as quickly as possible, but they also need to be evaluated for efficacy and safety. So you should only consider submitting to CTAP if the product is either already approved for another indication, or if it's at an appropriately late stage of development that beginning treatment of COVID-19 infected patients can be supported. You should also consider whether your product can be identified as a possible priority therapy for COVID-19. And the U.S. government has consensus documents that outline some of these priorities. They're not fully publicly available lists, but based on the symptoms of COVID-19, you can draw some conclusions. We can all draw some conclusions about what those potential priority therapy ideas might be. Apologies. There are some situations in which we do not recommend submitting a request to CTAP. First of all, if your product is in early preclinical development, then it's not likely ready for the type of expedited development that CTAP is designed to support. In these cases, FDA is recommending submission of a pre-IND package, typical meeting request directly to the appropriate division at FDA. And this is the typical pathway for consulting on a development program prior to the clinical stage. You can then work with FDA on the appropriate development considerations and plans for your product as a COVID-19 treatment. Alternatively, if you already have an open IND for your product, you should directly contact the responsible review division at CDER or CBER before contacting CTAP and discuss with them the best step forward in developing your product, specifically as a treatment for COVID-19. And that review division can instruct you as to the best way to proceed. So if you do want to submit a request for proposal to CTAP, what are the contents of that submission going to look like? Ro has been working with some developers on potential COVID-19 treatments, and based on direct feedback we have received from CTAP and pertinent CDER review divisions, requests to CTAP should consist of a sufficiently comprehensive pre-IND package so that CTAP and the assigned review division can rapidly review and respond fully to your proposal. And that will allow them to expedite the development process and your IND. Gaps in your proposal are going to delay submission and review of your subsequent IND, and thus delay getting your product into the clinic for testing as a COVID-19 treatment. So a comprehensive package is going to be a necessity, and it's going to require the appropriate non-clinical and CMC data. And it's important to note that, as we said, while a protocol alone can be submitted to CTAP for review, our recommendation is that a submission be limited to a protocol only if FDA has already reviewed all of the other supporting information for your product. So that would be in cases where you already either have an approved product under a different indication, or you have an existing IND under which clinical studies have already been allowed to proceed. So in these cases, FDA will have already seen your non-clinical and CMC support for your product. If you're considering an expanded access request, content of that request is going to vary depending on the type of request you're submitting. Minimum requirements include appropriate FDA forms and then documents such as letters of authorization. So as an example, if you were wanting to treat an individual patient via emergency use, the submission is going to be really small. There's a form that you fill out that then basically constitutes the protocol. And that would be accompanied by a letter of authorization and an agreement with the holder of the product that you're able to administer it. And in some cases, permissions for emergency use can even be granted over the phone by FDA. And that's in contrast to wanting to permission to treat multiple patients. A submission like that is going to include a full protocol that's submitted to some sort of open IND. For requests for emergency use authorization, FDA does have a guidance that we provided the link for here that explains the general recommendations and procedures for an EUA. Any EUA should include a well-organized summary of the available scientific evidence regarding the product's safety and effectiveness, its risks, including the known adverse event profile and its benefits, and any available approved alternatives to the product. The nature of the emergency can affect the exact type and amount of data that need to be submitted in an emergency use authorization. But in general, the submission includes the items in this list here. Once you submit this, FDA then may seek additional data and information as needed to assure that the statutory requirements are met for the issuance of an EUA. So if you decide that your product is a good fit for a CTAP submission, how do you submit that request to CTAP? So for drug products, which are products regulated by CDER, you're going to directly contact CDER at the address provided on the CTAP website. And You should continually check this website for updated information and instructions prior to submitting. It is being updated on a periodic basis. We're seeing it updated about weekly, so you'll want to keep checking back in there. For biologic products that are regulated by CBER, CBER does have a separate COVID-19 website, and there is a specific email address for CBER to make contact about these types of submissions. CBER has also asked that if your product is already assigned to a review division within CBER, that you contact that review office rather than working through CTAP. And also note that for EUAs, CBER has a dedicated email address for those. And just to remind you, CTAP doesn't include the development of vaccines, so that needs to be dealt with separately as you would a regular vaccine development program. As promised, we have a couple of slides here that present important links so that when you download this presentation, you'll have those readily available to you. And with that, I'm going to pass this back to Kevin to summarize our content for today.
Thank you, Teresa. So here's a brief summary of what we covered today. I'm not going to read through these, but again, the key points are that generally these paths require an open IND with FDA except for emergency use authorization. Again, we recommend a comprehensive pre-IND submission to CTAP for your product, and this, again, does allow FDA to review expeditiously and help you get into the clinic as quickly as possible with more minimal delays. And by all means, the situation here is very fluid with COVID-19, and FDA is making updates at least weekly, so we encourage you to continue to check the FDA websites at the links that we've provided for the latest instructions before making any submissions to FDA. And with that, we are happy to try to address any questions.
Okay, great. Great presentations, everyone. So it's time to move on to Q&A. As a reminder for our audience, there is still time to submit your questions. You can use that Q&A tab to the left of your screen. So let's kick this off here. I'll pass this to either one of you. Why do we need to submit a complete pre-IND package to CTAP? Can't we just submit a protocol or even just a detailed synopsis as a proposal?
I'll take this question. So, yeah, as we described in our presentation, the recommendation to submit a comprehensive pre-IND package does allow CTAP as well as the assigned review division to review the proposal, try to understand any potential gaps to give you guidance for your future IND. And if the information that you submit isn't comprehensive, there could be delays in clearing the IND, which would delay the start of your study. But on the other hand, if you're dealing with an FDA-approved product, one that's already out there on the commercial marketplace, or one that FDA is already familiar with because you have an IND already in place with FDA, meaning that there's potentially, I guess, less risk for any types of gaps in your proposal, it could be appropriate to submit just a protocol to CTAP. Again, the more comprehensive your proposal, the better the better CTAP and the review division will be able to guide you and make sure that you're truly ready to get into the clinic with your proposal.
Okay, very good. For an emergency use authorization, what does advanced stage of development mean?
Teresa, do you want to take this one?
Sure, I can do that. So for an emergency use authorization, you need to provide to FDA, and you need to understand comprehensively the risk and benefit profile of your product. And so you need to be at an advanced enough stage of development to do that. That's likely going to be either you've already been approved for another indication, so you have a pretty good safety profile and benefit profile for your product, at least in some indication that has similarities probably to COVID-19 treatments that COVID-19 symptoms that you want to treat. Or you may be in an advanced stage of clinical development. You probably need to be maybe in phase 2B or something like that, so where you've gathered enough safety data and some data on benefit of your product to be able to support an EUA. And also note that expectations for how much information you need to have about your risk and benefit profile may be different for asymptomatic or mild patients than it is for very severe patients who are hospitalized, and we're hearing about the ventilator, extended time on ventilators and things like that. Those situations are going to be different. So essentially, you need to be able to provide enough data for FDA to be able to assess benefit and risk of your product in this group of patients.
Okay, very good. So does an emergency use authorization require clinical data in COVID-19 patients? And if so, how do we generate that data?
I'll take this question. So generally speaking, yes, an emergency use authorization does require clinical data in COVID-19 patients. So far, quite frankly, there have only been 2 EUAs granted or authorized by FDA. The one remdesivir that I mentioned did have data from a couple of global clinical studies. Again, on paper, EUAs do require enough information so that FDA can work with the company and develop appropriate instructions and prescribing information in an emergency situation. So the other the other product that it was granted an EUA was sort of the more somewhat political one. It didn't have any data in COVID-19 patients whatsoever. It had quite a bit of understanding of its toxicity profile, as well as potential of its antiviral activity to treat these patients. So an EUA was granted. So on the drug side, there's just, the drug and biologic side, there's just 2 EUAs granted to date. If to generate the data, basically it's as we discussed, get in place an IND and conduct studies as appropriate to generate some evidence of efficacy of the product to help support an EUA.
Very good. What is the current mix of proposals between early, mid, and later stage treatment? Are there any differences in paths of note between them?
It's a good question. I'll take this one as well, Teresa, if that's okay.
Fine, yeah.
Yeah, the current mix of proposals, early, mid, to late. It's difficult to really glean this, whether early stage proposals are out there. We, at Roe, we're getting quite a lot of inquiries sort of across the board. And again, for products that are very early in development, preclinical development, the FDA is not really publishing any information about those. The ones that are of note that FDA is identifying on their website, there's a tremendous number, although we didn't discuss medical devices today, there have been a tremendous number of EUAs granted predominantly on the diagnostic product side of things for testing for COVID-19. As well, FDA is highlighting that they've done quite a number of emergency INDs for individual patient treatment. They're not necessarily publishing numbers directly. So it is kind of hard to glean where they are, but I can say that just across the board, I mean, there are globally, I think, 100 or more therapeutic products that companies are trying to develop for COVID-19, and they pretty much span from preclinical to ones that are, approved products being used for COVID-19 at this point.
Okay, very good. I think we have time for one final question, and just letting our audience know if we didn't get to your question, we'll try and get back to you individually after the webinar. So final question for you, and this is a bit of an opinion question, but with all the new accelerated efforts at the FDA, moving forward, do you expect FDA to continue many of these efforts, or will they fall back into standard operating protocols?
Teresa, you want to take a crack at this one?
Well, I can, as you said, it's an opinion question. I think we all understand that the urgency of COVID-19 is going to continue for at least a little bit until we have more treatments available, until there's hopefully a vaccination available, and we have more control over things. So I personally am going to expect FDA to continue with this expedited path for at least during this, high concern time. I don't know what will happen, once there's hopefully some treatments that are identified that assist, and, if there's hopefully a vaccination that's successful at that point, I suspect some of those things are going to fall back into more typical pathways. But I would expect FDA to continue prioritizing this for the time being, because we obviously don't have good solutions at this point. And Kevin, I don't know if you wanted to add on to that.
No, actually, I think you gave a comprehensive answer. I agree.
All right, well, that's a perfect note to end on, I think. I want to thank everyone for attending this webinar and submitting so many great questions. I want to thank our speakers for participating and Ro for presenting the webinar. This session has been recorded. You'll be able to access the recording within 24 hours using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all at future events.